Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're totally shattering those textbook stereotypes you might have in your head. We are zooming all the way out, starting right from the intimate, everyday details of an ancient peasant's daily life and scaling all the way up to the grand, massive logistics of a military empire. Before we jump right in, I want you to ask yourself a quick question. When you picture ancient Egypt, do you just envision static stone pyramids and isolated pharaohs? Or do you actually see a highly advanced network of everyday people with rich domestic lives and massive continent-spanning supply chains? Well, by the end of this explainer, I guarantee you're going to be seeing the latter.
So here is our roadmap for today. First, inside the Egyptian home. Second, diet and domestic life. Third, the evolution of fashion. Fourth, beauty, wigs, and makeup. Fifth, New Kingdom military might. And finally, supplying the empire.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, Inside the Egyptian Home. Okay, let's strip away those grand stone temples for just a second. You know what the real architectural equalizer of the ancient world was? Mud bricks. Seriously, both the ultra-rich and the poorest peasants lived in houses made of this exact same material. Now sure, there were definitely differences. A lower-class home was usually just a few small rooms with these really narrow, high windows, to keep that intense heat out. Meanwhile, wealthy estates could reach 2 stories and actually had dedicated bathrooms. But the core building block? Exactly the same.
And stepping inside, these mud brick walls were actually beautifully decorated. People used bright ceramic faience tiles, sometimes with these gorgeous floral patterns, right around their door and window frames, just to add a fun pop of color. To light up the place after dark, they used really simple but incredibly effective oil lamps with linen wicks. And culturally, this is super cool. Inside these homes, women actually enjoyed individual rights equal to men in the eyes of the law. Upper-class women were essentially the CEOs managing these massive estates, while lower-class women usually split their time between running the household and helping out in the agricultural fields.
Moving right along, Section 2, Diet and Domestic Life.
So, moving from the living quarters out into the fields, we see that ancient Egyptians spent an immense amount of time and energy farming. They relied heavily on the Nile River to grow wheat and barley. Why? Because those were the absolute daily staples they needed to make bread and beer.
But their diet went way beyond just bread and beer. They actually enjoyed a surprisingly rich variety of meats. We're talking beef, pork, geese, and ducks. And they paired that with fresh, locally grown veggies like peas, beans, cucumbers, and lettuce. Plus, if you had a bit of wealth to your name, you could absolutely swap out that daily beer for a really nice cup of wine.
Which brings us to Section 3, the evolution of fashion.
Looking at the people themselves, it's actually fascinating how much men's fashion drastically evolved over the centuries. Back in the Old Kingdom, it was beautifully simple, just a basic linen apron wrapped around the waist. That's it. But by the time we hit the New Kingdom, things got highly sophisticated. Suddenly, men are wearing layered, pleated skirts, sometimes literally 2 at once, tied off with these long, dangling bows. But despite all that evolution, the absolute basics, like leather or woven papyrus sandals and that foundational apron, were democratic staples. Literally everyone wore them, from the poorest peasant all the way up to the pharaoh.
Now, curiously enough, while the men were acting as the extravagant fashion trendsetters of the era, always changing up their skirt lengths and pleats, women's fashion remained remarkably stable. They wore this really simple, elegant, and consistent shirt-cut dress known as the kalaziris. Honestly, from the oldest dynasties right up into the New Kingdom, this tight-fitting linen dress with supporting straps was the absolute timeless standard of Egyptian beauty.
All right, Section 4, Beauty, Wigs, and Makeup. But look, clothing was really only the base layer here. Take their iconic, heavily painted eyelids, for example. You've seen them, right? Well, they weren't just purely cosmetic. That sticky, grated malachite paste actually acted like ancient sunglasses. It absorbed the harsh glare of the blinding African sun and physically caught the brutal desert dust before it could get into their eyes. Pretty genius, right?
And if you want a truly mind-blowing fact about how they stayed comfortable, just imagine this. To beat the brutal heat, upper-class Egyptians would literally strap a thick cone of aromatic fat to the top of their elaborate wigs. Seriously. As they walked around outside, the hot sun would slowly melt the fat, and it acted as this fragrant, built-in air conditioner streaming down and cooling their bodies. It's totally ingenious, even if it sounds a little bit messy.
Now let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, New Kingdom military might.
To secure this incredibly thriving society during the New Kingdom, the Egyptians had to become absolute master builders of defensive fortifications.
Just think about these incredibly dense, 3-meter-thick walls. They engineered specific tower piers, which were essentially fortified balconies, designed so defenders could safely just rain arrows and heavy stones straight down onto attacking forces.
But here's the thing. They didn't just hide behind thick walls. The Egyptian military was famously adaptable. They were incredibly eager to integrate foreign technology right into their own ranks. As they expanded their territory, they gladly accepted tributes from their Asiatic neighbors, stuff like advanced helmets and composite bows, and immediately put them to use. It really proves they were a dynamic military force that constantly evolved by absorbing the strengths of the people around them.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 6, Supplying the Empire.
The harsh reality is, you simply cannot run a massive, fortified empire without an absolute mastery of supply chains. And this is where their ingenuity just shines. Water transport was the true backbone of their military campaigns. While other armies were slogging for weeks over harsh, unforgiving desert terrain, the Egyptians utilized the Nile and the Mediterranean Sea to rapidly transport troops, grain, and equipment. They just entirely bypassed that painfully slow overland travel.
To really give you a sense of scale here, archaeological reconstructions of their ship planks reveal that a standard 20-meter seagoing vessel could carry an astonishing 17 tons of cargo in just a single trip. I mean, that is a massive logistical advantage.
To put that scale into perspective so it's instantly understandable, a single 20-ton Egyptian ship could replace a massive, incredibly slow, and resource-heavy caravan of 244 donkeys, literally 244. By shifting their supply lines to the water, they completely revolutionized their power projection and sustained their armies way far from home.
And their mastery of water logistics wasn't just for moving grain and soldiers. It actually allowed them to transport incomprehensibly heavy 350-ton solid stone obelisks directly down the Nile, straight from the quarries in Aswan all the way to Karnak. How? Well, they achieved this by using giant hogging trusses, which are basically these massive tension ropes to keep the ships from literally snapping in half under that immense weight.
Because of all this, their coastal strongholds in the Levant were never just vanity projects for the pharaohs. As researchers have noted, these ports were the vital, breathing lifelines of the Egyptian military hegemony. Without these ports to receive those 20-ton ships, holding any territory in Canaan and Syria would have been practically impossible.
So, having zoomed all the way out from a beautifully lit mud brick home and a melting fat cone on a brutally hot day, all the way to the decks of massive grain-laden ships supplying a sprawling fortified empire, I want to leave you with this. Reconsider everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt. It wasn't just a static land of tombs and monuments. It was a vibrant, ingenious, and deeply interconnected society. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning what you think you know.